Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk about the service in the deal, so week 15 through 16, and talk about what happens after the contract is signed. So we talked about the negotiation prospect that goes from prospecting to qualifying that prospect and negotiating partner, and then having that meeting with that partner, approaching them, building credibility, building rapport, asking the right questions, which is obviously the most important part of the negotiation, presenting our solution, being able to overcome objections, close the deal. But last but not least is the follow up, the post sale, which is the area where most negotiators actually slip up. So, how do we do follow up methods? And again, a lot of this is really common sense. Unfortunately, it's not common practice. And some follow up methods are some examples: personal visits that really kind of reinforce the value that you bring to the table, follow up calls, email messages, written cards. I think written cards and letters are probably the most powerful. I know that sometimes it kind of could be seem a little bit over the top, but when you provide a personalized message, it's very easy to ignore an email. But when someone takes the time to take a card and write it, that person will open it pretty much 100% of the time. And so I think it provides a personal message that shows that you value the relationship and that partnership. And also the use of social media. And obviously, this class is no stranger to Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, but I think LinkedIn could be a powerful message to not only connect with that person, but also send a follow up message thanking them for their partnership. So why follow up? The contract's already signed, the deal is done. They may have submitted a check or whatever that commitment is. So why do that? Well, pretty simple. It's all about the relationship. It's all about profitability. And the way that you make relationships more profitable is through upselling and cross-selling. And so for those who may not be familiar with upselling and cross-selling, let's take the example of a car. So an upselling may be someone that is maybe just was leasing a car for 3 years and they're about to get out of their lease and they went from a older car to a newer car, more expensive car. And cross-selling would be someone has a car, but you may want to send them a warranty or maybe new tires or maybe some type of a better radio. So what cross-selling does is that enables you to take an initial product and introduce them to new services of that product. So when doing enhancing the relationship, there's a number of different ways. Sometimes we struggle with, okay, I don't really have a reason to visit them. They're happy with the product, they're happy with their service, they're happy with their partnership. I don't want to be a nuisance to them. So sometimes the enhancing the relationship, there's different ways of how we can approach them. And there's through just building awareness, maybe exploration, maybe there's a different industry trend, maybe expansion of their service, maybe expansion of their company, or just to show a level of commitment that you have towards them, that you just want to reinforce that, hey, even though nothing has changed, I'm here for you. The following chart that you see here is basically just a graph that shows, the account opportunity and the share of wallet. And the way to understand this is that the account opportunity, obviously, we're looking at those accounts that have high potentials. And what that means is that there's a lot of potential for strong upside, for cross-selling and upselling opportunity. Then there's accounts that, we label them as deadbeats. They're unattractive, and there's really no reason to upsell and cross-sell to them. So we've got to make sure that we invest our time and enhance relationship with the right accounts. If you look to the far right, we have the crown jewel. So it basically meets all the opportunities. They have a great share of the wallet, meaning that they spend a lot of money in our services and solutions, and they're highly attractive. And then there's a drag accounts where, they have the share of wallet, but there's not a lot of potential out there. You may bill them at a high amount, but there's really no opportunity for upselling and cross-selling. So when we look at our opportunities and accounts for those who go into sales or in marketing role, look at this chart and say, okay, the accounts that I have, do they fall into these categories? There are some accounts and clients that we manage that may be deadbeat accounts where they buy, from time to time. Maybe they're not that very profitable, but they do spend money. So usually accounts when we're managing clients do fall into one of these categories. Another thing that we want to talk about that might be unique in negotiations is professional negotiation and entertainment. Now, entertainment why is it important? Well, it also differs from culture to culture. Partners prefer that face-to-face when seeking highly complex sales. So that means that when you're entertaining, they may want to meet face-to-face for lunch, maybe have a cocktail, or even just for coffee. And socializing could be seen as a big part in some cultures. And we have to recognize that in some cultures, socializing is important in the business process. In other cultures, it's deemed as actually taboo and that we shouldn't do it. So there's just a definition of entertainment. This is actually a definition by Americans IRS. And you can just read it here, but just a couple key points. It's any activity that generally considered provide entertainment, amusement, or recreation, and includes meals provided to a customer and client. It's also an ordinary expense and one that is common and accepted in your trade or business. And it's a necessary expense and one that is helpful and appropriate. So this is something that actually the government actually has written defined as an expense. And this is actually for my own company. I basically have a number of expenses throughout the year that have to fall into these categories. So why should we care about this? Well, as college students, I want to just kind of show a graph, and this is a little bit outdated, but this was actually done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And basically it says that the percent using alcohol in the past month. So it's basically heavy alcohol use amongst adults from age to 22. So if you just look at this graph here, you can see that those enrolled in full-time college drink more than those that are not enrolled in full-time college. So without going into a lot of the details of this research, I'll just kind of summarize what it talked about. Among age 18 or older, alcohol use increased when increasing levels of education. So basically, the more educated you are, the more you drink. Also, those that were enrolled in full-time college were more likely than their peers to use alcohol, binge drink, and drink heavily. And when we look at the definition of binge drinking, it's really, it's not what we think. Sometimes we think that binge drinking is having 10 drinks within an hour. Actually, binge drinking is having about 3 or 4 drinks within an hour to 2 hours. So binge drinking is not a lot. I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, have binge drank. So in one of the other interesting studies or facts about this is that when surveyed, almost 80% of college students believe drinking is a central part of their social life. And I don't think there's any argument there. So when you look at here is that as people get the current binge and heavy alcohol use among persons aged 12 or older by age. So if you kind of look at this, actually the drinking actually increases as you get older. So if you just kind of look really quickly on this graph, so heavy alcohol use and really kind of teeters off just a little bit, but binge drinking actually starts to increase. So after college, what does this mean? So alcohol use, based on this survey, is that 70% of those people between 21 and 25 drink, and also binge drink and heavy alcohol use. So the 3 categories of drinking, alcohol, binge, and heavy alcohol use, all increase as you get older. So why am I talking about this? Why is this so important? Well, unfortunately, I've seen in the workplace that drinking can kind of get sometimes, and socializing can get in the way of business. So when we look at why this is important, is that sometimes entertaining, especially when it comes to sales and marketing and advertising, is part of the job. There's a term in American culture called schmoozing, networking, going out there and meeting people. Also, those who go into sales and marketing usually have a budget or expenditure and have these expense accounts that they have to utilize. And for those that negotiate on a daily basis, they are considered revenue generators and they have the freedom to spend more. And sometimes there's also this thing called internal selling, which is part of managing your career. So I forwarded an article to you on professional entertaining and sales, and basically this is a summary of the model. And so this is basically what researchers do is they create models. And so what this looks at is basically my dependent variable here is sales performance. It's the outcome. And what I'm looking at is factors, my independent variables that impact sales performance. So I'm looking at what are the 2 factors that can impact sales performance. One is entertainment. And then one is an aspect called internal bonding. So what's interesting is I wanted to basically look at what was the impact that entertainment had on sales performance. And what that means is, okay, if I entertain and take people out to dinner and lunches and drinks, will that impact sales? But what came out of this research is that as I did more interviewing of managers and other salespeople and other negotiators, they said that a lot of negotiations is not something that's external, but also internal to the organization. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you have to go out with your colleagues, your peers that work within the organization. So another factor kind of came out of this research, and that internal bonding will impact sales performance as well. That if you have the resources to work on, say, a deal that you're negotiating on, that can impact the closure rate or impact the success of that deal closing. So when we ran this model in this research, we found that there was a correlation, meaning that there was a very, very strong relationship and positive relationship between entertainment and sales performance, and also internal bonding and sales performance. If these numbers are 0.005 or 0.01, you'd see a kind of weak relationship. So when we look at these numbers at 0.435 and 0.367, this is what we call the path coefficient. And there's a strong correlation between the two independent variables, entertainment and internal bonding, and sales performance. So what are the types of entertainment and sales? There are a number of them, and they're pretty obvious. Dinners, golf outings, maybe happy hour, lunch, conferences, and networking events. And a term in American culture called boondoggles. So networking events could be conferences that you go to where the initial really objective is to learn about a subject matter or network, but sometimes there are events that are really supported by entertainment events such as drinking and cocktail hours. So again, part of American culture, the culture is different when it comes to socializing, but in American culture, it is very custom to do business over any one of these types of entertaining. So why should you be concerned? Well, there's a number of reasons why. Most of the time, when you work with a company, you do have, and you can't make this assumption all the time, it can be free and almost unlimited. You have an expense account. Also, in American culture, you see, some college students, you may have seen this while being in an American campus, is that you go from mild drinks such as beer to harder stuff such as martinis, shots, scotch, and vodka. And the other biggest concern is that individuals cannot separate what the meaning is from socializing and entertaining. And socializing is how I define it. Is socializing is something you do on the weekends. It's something that you do with your friends. Where entertaining has a business purpose. So what are the consequences here? Well, one is obviously the obvious one is driving under the influence. Also jeopardizing your career, such as your reputation, maybe jeopardizing promotion, or even just worse, risk of being fired. Also, there's even smaller consequences, such as going over on expenses. I know a number of individuals that had gotten in trouble for abusing their budget, and sometimes the resulting consequence is termination of employment. And sometimes, especially those who are young in their careers, may be taken advantage by clients. And of course, for those alcohol, as we've seen, and maybe of ourselves or maybe our colleagues, they make poor decisions. So this is just one event that was publicized years ago and actually was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. The CEO of a pharmaceutical company called Savvis, Robert McCormick, he went to a business meeting at a gentleman's club in New York, and he charged over $241,000 on an American Express card. He actually refused to pay the bill, claiming that it was fraud, that he didn't do this. Well, what do you think happened to Robert? And I'll just pause for a second to have you think about what happened. Well, American Express actually took the side of the gentleman's club and sued McCormick and the company. And McCormick was forced to resign. This actually created a huge PR nightmare, not only for Savvis, but for Mr. McCormick's family. His daughter was going in college and actually had to drop out of school because of all the bad publicity that this received. Now, that might seem like an extreme example. You would never go and spend $241,000 in a gentleman's club. Well, actually, I hope that you wouldn't. So, but this is something that actually to one of my colleagues, and I've changed the names here to protect them, that actually a colleague of mine took a client out to dinner, and he stepped away from the table. And while gone, the client actually ordered a $1,000 bottle of champagne. Well, what should John do? And there's a number of choices you can do. You can kind of make it a very embarrassing situation and say, you know what, have the client pay for it. Or he could actually pay for it himself, or just basically have the company pay for it. Well, I asked the question, what do you think happened? Well, unfortunately, John did not ask the client to pay for it. Neither did he have his company pay for it. But he actually paid for it himself. And he told him it took him 6 to 9 months to pay off this credit card bill. He was young. He was about 25, 26 years old and a few years out of college. And so it took him a while to pay off that amount. Also, this is an executive. Unfortunately, I actually worked directly with this person. Makes a fool of himself. So Chris, a senior salesman, is invited to a big industry conference. It has about 10 to 15 cocktails in about a 3-hour period. So you can imagine what the impact would have in a 3-hour period if he had 15 drinks. Chris becomes abrasive, rude, and obnoxious to the waitstaff and gets escorted out of the conference. Outraged, Chris goes outside and jumps on top of a cab. I'm talking on the top of the cab, yelling at security in front of clients, vendors, peers, and our competition. What do you think happened to Chris? Well, Chris was someone who made anywhere between $400,000 and $500,000 a year. He was an extreme performer for the company, and actually, he was fired from that organization. And I'll tell you, that happened maybe about 10, 12 years ago. He was never able to find another job again. In fact, he had to go into an entirely different industry. And so once this was found out by individuals, this was something that people just didn't want to hire and take a risk on. So he not only ruined his job security, he actually ruined his entire career. There's also an example of poor decision making. This is actually a very close friend of mine. He was an accountant for a big firm, was sent out to an assignment during tax season. He did have a problem drinking and occasionally did get behind the wheel and drove. He goes on assignment to Arizona, which is very strict when it comes to driving under the influence, especially when driving a vehicle. He takes out a client as a couple and gets behind the wheel. Bob gets pulled over. What do you think happened to Bob? Well, my friend Bob actually served 6 months in prison. This is an individual who actually graduated top of his class, had a CPA, Certified Public Accounting, a license, also had a master's degree in accounting. And here he was in jail, and he actually got let go of that position and had to find another career. Another one is actually a friend of a friend that I went to college with, actually Tina. Again, I changed the name. Was a straight A student. Graduated top of her class in finance, and she had several job offers from top investment firms. And this is in the 90s, so having a job that paid $50,000 was quite a lot in 1995. During her college career, she was caught with fake ID, fake identification, which basically said she was 21, and was arrested for underage drinking and brought up on felony charges. Well, she failed to report this to her new employer. So basically, she didn't write this down on her application. And what do you think happened to Tina? Well, this is what happened. She actually got hired. And this is what happened. She actually had an apartment. She actually signed a 12-month lease. She spent about $3,000 on a wardrobe. And so she thought that she was basically very successful and that she was ready to start her career. Well, when they did the background check, they found out that she had lied on her application, that she actually had a criminal record, that she actually got arrested. Well, HR went to her and said, can we talk to you? As they pulled her into the office, security came and completely cleaned out her desk, put everything in a box, and put it outside the office. HR then told her what was happening, to wait outside and to call a cab and to get a lawyer. And it took her a long time. She owed her parents a lot of money. She had to basically pay to get out of her lease, and she had to start all over again. Not to mention the tens of thousands of dollars she had to pay in legal fees. So, I've told you a bunch of stories, and I promise you that these are all, unfortunately, they're all true. None of them happened to me. They're all friends of mine. So here's the thing. What can you do? Well, let's go back to our first example for John, who's taking his client out. One, you want to set limits. Set a time frame. So if you're out taking clients out to drink, say, you know what, I'll buy drinks from 6 to 7 o'clock, right? Or say, I'm only going to send a couple dollars, or set a budget for that time frame. Also, set expectations with the client. In New York, what I would do is, I didn't have a huge expense account, but I did have an expense account. But I also knew that eating downtown and going to drinks downtown was cheaper than eating uptown. So I always set expectations with the client of where I want them to eat, right? Set those rules. If you're going to invite them out to eat, pick the restaurant, pick the place that you want to eat at. Also, another thing to do is communicate not only with management, I'll go back to that in a little bit, but also communicate with the waitstaff. So as I mentioned before about John, what he should have done is basically talk to the waiter or to a bartender and say, I'm going to pay this bill. Can you tell me if anything gets kind of ordered out of the ordinary? And so that's actually happened to me, where I actually stepped away from the desk. But I had talked to the waiter, and actually the waiter came up to me and said, Mr. Rodriguez, one of your clients ordered a $500 bottle of wine. And I was really upset about this because I really didn't expect the person to take advantage of me. And so what the waiter did is actually he went up to my client and said, unfortunately, we ran out of that bottle of wine. He actually lied to him. But what was great is that he recommended a bottle of wine that only was about $70, $80. So that was basically 1/5 of the price of that. And so, that waiter had my back and had my best intentions. But not only that, he knew that I was going to tip him pretty well. So that's something to think about, is always talk to those individuals, the waiters and the bartenders, before you take anyone out. Also, as I mentioned before, know the difference between entertaining and socializing. It's extremely important. Remember, socializing is something that you do with your friends, something you do on the weekends. Entertaining is something that you do that do with clients that has a business purpose. Remember, entertainment, there has to have some type of business objective to it. So who's your best source of guidance when it comes to these things? Management, human resources, your colleagues? No, none of those three. Your judgment is your best resource. And I love this quote. I actually took it from a show. Those who keep good form keep respect. So just know your surroundings. Know it's okay to have a couple drinks, to have a couple beers, have a glass of wine. That's okay. It is part of the business, but it's very important to do it, to enjoy the moment, but also do it with responsibility. And the best recommendation I can give is, to use entertainment to strengthen the relationship, not establish one. So that concludes the one on entertaining. I wanted to conclude with some of the chapters that we've talked about here, from chapters 14 to 16, and talk about negotiating power. So we'll conclude this week with some of the last few chapters of negotiating power and the chapters in the book of Global Negotiating. So when we look on negotiating power, we always think, okay, if we're a smaller company or a company that lacks resources, then we have less negotiating power. But sometimes less powerful is not always a disadvantage. And remember that we go back to the principal negotiation, right? Focus on the interests. What are the interests of ourselves and our party? We also have to focus on our resources. Sometimes the resources that we have in hand might be stronger than our larger counterpart, but also focus on our skills as well. There are four grand power strategies that the negotiator talks about. It talks about you can utilize these strategies from support from other organizations, also autonomy, also assertion, so say maybe change the board to avoid a hostile takeover, or just sharing resources. There's also a number of tactical power tools, such as third parties, linking issues, building bridges within those individuals, also exploitation of maybe a certain topic. For instance, right now, a lot of companies are really exploiting the HB2 law, right, and that partnership and how they do business in North Carolina, right? So exploitation of those certain topics can be a huge advantage for any organization. Chapter 15 was a very short chapter, and what it basically talks about is dealing with stress, right? And the causes of deal stress could be that the contract is not perfect, or there might be a change in circumstance that might change some of the facts and some of the terms of that contract. And we looked at this graph here, the conflict continuum. There are different areas of how we can deal with conflict. Obviously, we can avoid it. We can negotiate. When we look at negotiation, we can actually look at several different things. One is mediation, arbitration, or also litigation. Now, chapter 16 also talks about negotiating after the contract. And there's three kinds of negotiation. There is post-deal, intra-deal, and extra-deal. Post-deal is when we want to renew the relationship when the deal expires. Intra-deal is when they want to negotiate when the deal is still in play, but maybe they want to achieve a balance between contractual stability, and maybe there's an adaptation to something that has changed within that company's business model. Or the extra deal is we just want to get out of this contract. There's relief from a legally binding obligation, and that's the one thing that we want to avoid here. So some of the rules for post and extra deal, right? One, we want to provide deal options in the original contract. Allow them to that flexibility that shows that you're committed to this relationship. We also want to review what has gone right in this relationship, right? But also get an understanding of what went wrong. And also, as we talked about in Getting to Yes, we want to understand the alternatives in the negotiated deal. Chapter 16 also talks about renegotiating existing transactions, right? So here are the guidelines for extra deal. Some of the questions we want to answer. How can it be reduced? How can we reduce that possibility of an extra deal transaction? And how should parties make process more productive and fair? Well, before the breakdown, right? The contract does not equal relationship, and that's what we've talked about. That we have to understand that a contract, though it's written and may be signed, does not mean that we have a relationship in place. That's the way it goes back to the beginning of this talk about what can we do to strengthen that relationship. We also remember that this is a process. Negotiation is a process that we invest in. We don't want to rush it. We also want to provide alternatives for renegotiation and consider the mediation as well. So after the breakdown, we want to understand the basis for demands, evaluate the benefits of a legal proceeding. We also want to involve all the parties and understand all the different alternatives that we have out there. I think one of the things that's really important is taking a step back from the negotiating table and really being creative and creating options of what happens if the negotiation doesn't go the way we plan. Also, we want to design the right process for renegotiation. So if the negotiation does break down, what is that process in place that we can go forward where both parties are involved? And also, if we do need to involve a mediator, we have to make sure that we have the right mediator in place. And not something that we just pick at the last minute. We want to basically be proactive and say, okay, if things do not go the way we want to involve the right mediator. Okay, so that was really quickly just some of the chapters there. There are some case studies in those chapters. I asked you to review them. I will not test on them. There's probably about 10 pages on the Enron case and a partnership and relationship and contract negotiation with, I believe, was India. So again, I think it's an interesting case, but I won't test on that. So here's the exam 3 review. It'll be 40 to 50 multiple choice questions. It'll take about 60 minutes, just like the last exam. We'll cover chapters 10 through 16. The lectures will be weeks 12, 13, and 15 and 16. So week 14, there wasn't any. That was when you did your presentation. So there's no lecture there. Also, the articles will be dealing with difficult people, body language, and also entertainment strategies. And all those articles are posted and is posted online. Also, I looked at a lot of your presentations. You guys did a phenomenal job on the presentations, and so I saw a lot of recurring topics. So I thought instead of introducing some new topics here, I thought that I'd like to test you on those topics that you already understand. So I will test on BATNA, principal negotiation and interest, all topics that came from the book Getting to Yes. Also look at the American way of negotiating. I think you guys did a beautiful job of discussing the American way of negotiating, especially the term time is money. Also, Hofstede's model, which I think pretty much everyone talked about, and I think that graph, everyone utilized that very well. The art of objection handling, discovery process, meaning that the types of questions, so what is an exploratory question, what's a probing question, what's a digging deeper question, really study those slides and really understand the examples of that. And also communication styles. What is an interest to someone who is a directive, what is interest of a person who is emotive. I also want to finish up, some books that I'd like to recommend that have merely been an influence in my life, and it helped me in negotiating and helped me, just grow as an executive. One is A Powerful Engagement. What basically talks about managing energy. These individuals are actually talk about how they manage athletes and how they apply the same concepts and models to business executives. Another Emotional Intelligence. Again, I talk about that. If that we can be the smartest person, even the hardest working person in the room. But if we can't connect with others and really have a strong measure of who we are emotionally, we will not succeed in connecting with others. And another one, I actually just read this past year, is a book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And it's really about having very, I would say, different and difficult conversations with our partners. And so it really talks about that buyer-seller relationship. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for all your time and commitment. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great being introduced into Schema Business School, and it's been great teaching you. And hopefully that you enjoyed the class, and I hope that I stay in touch with all of you. So thank you for a great semester, and best of luck.